When most people picture a cave lion, they picture exactly what the name suggests. A slightly bigger Ice Age version of the African lion, maybe with a shaggier coat, prowling around frozen caves alongside woolly mammoths. That is the image in almost every documentary, every museum diorama, every kid's dinosaur book that sneaks in a few Ice Age mammals at the end. A prehistoric lion, just an ancient cousin of the modern lion, same species, slightly different fur. The DNA says otherwise. And what it actually reveals is stranger, older, and far more interesting than a big fuzzy lion. Let's start with the number that upends the whole story. For a long time, scientists assumed cave lions and modern lions split apart a few 100,000 years ago, which would make them close relatives, basically the difference between two dog breeds. But when researchers sequenced ancient mitochondrial DNA from cave lion fossils, the divergence time kept getting pushed back further and further. First, it was estimated at around 600,000 years. Then new analysis pushed it past 1 million. Then, using a full set of complete mitochondrial genomes from 31 different cave lion specimens, researchers calculated a split time of somewhere around 1.85 million years ago. And the most recent and most comprehensive study, published in 2026, using 12 full ancient genomes compared against 20 modern lion genomes, landed on a similar deep divergence, roughly 1.7 million years ago. To put that number in perspective, that is not a difference of a few thousand generations. That is longer than modern humans have existed as a species. Homo sapiens didn't even evolve yet when the lineage that became the cave lion broke away from the lineage that became the modern lion. These two animals were on separate evolutionary paths for nearly 2 million years, evolving independently, adapting to completely different environments, developing distinct skulls, distinct teeth, distinct bodies. That is not a subspecies. That is not a regional variant. Multiple genetic studies now support what many paleontologists suspected from the bones alone. The cave lion deserves its own full species name, Panthera spelaea, a lion in the same genus, but its own separate branch of the family tree. And once you start looking at what that separate branch actually became, the picture gets even wilder, because this was not some creature confined to one cave system in France. The cave lion's range is almost hard to believe. Fossils place this animal across Western Europe, all through Siberia and into North America, showing up in Alaska and Canada's Yukon Territory. For comparison, modern lions today are essentially restricted to parts of Africa, with one small isolated population in India. The cave lion at its peak was a holarctic apex predator, meaning it ruled the cold, high latitude regions across nearly the entire top half of the planet, spanning 3 continents. It was quite possibly one of the most widely distributed big cats that has ever existed on Earth. Here's something else that almost never makes it into the popular version of this story. We actually know what cave lions looked like, not from guesswork, but from direct physical evidence, because permafrost in Siberia has done something almost unbelievable. It has preserved actual cave lion bodies, not fossils, not bones, bodies. In 2017 and 2018, mammoth tusk hunters searching the banks of a Siberian river discovered 2 mummified cave lion cubs, just 15 meters apart, buried in the frozen ground. Researchers named them Boris and Sparta. Radiocarbon dating revealed something researchers didn't expect. Even though the 2 cubs were found almost next to each other, they had not died at the same time at all. Boris died around 43,000 years ago. Sparta died around 28,000 years ago, 15,000 years apart, buried within arm's reach of each other, which suggests this exact spot on the riverbank was likely a favored den site for cave lions across many, many generations, and also a dangerous one, since researchers believe permafrost cracks or sudden mudslides may have swallowed both cubs whole while they were only 1 or 2 months old. The preservation is almost impossible to overstate. Sparta is considered by researchers to be one of the best preserved Ice Age animals ever discovered, of any species. Her whiskers are intact. Her claws are still sharp. Her fur, skin, and internal organs survived essentially undisturbed for 28,000 years. And because the fur survived, scientists could finally answer a question that fossils alone could never answer. What color was a cave lion? The answer surprised people expecting a golden African lion-type coat. Sparta and Boris were covered in fur, closer to grayish yellow to light brown, without the visible spotting that African lion cubs typically have. They also had a thick, dense undercoat that African lion cubs simply do not grow, an insulating layer built for brutal Siberian cold rather than the African savanna. Researchers believe that as these cubs matured, their coats likely shifted toward a lighter, more grayish tone, probably an adaptation for blending into snow-covered landscapes rather than golden grasslands. This was not a lion painted a slightly different shade. This was a predator physically re-engineered for an entirely different climate. And then there's the main question, which turns out to be one of the more fascinating genetic mysteries in this whole story. Ancient humans left us thousands of cave paintings across Europe, and a striking number of them depict lions in exquisite detail, most famously in France's Chauvet Cave, where Ice Age artists painted scenes of cave lions hunting in groups. But across this entire body of prehistoric artwork, researchers have noticed something consistent. The lions are almost never shown with the thick manes that define adult male African lions today. Some show subtle, dark facial markings, but a full mane, the single most iconic visual feature of a modern male lion, appears to be missing. This has led scientists to a genuinely open hypothesis, one they are actively trying to test with genetic methods, that male cave lions may have never evolved manes at all, or had them only in a much smaller, more subtle form. If true, an adult male cave lion may have looked strikingly different from what most people assume. An enormous, powerfully built cat with a sleek head and no dramatic mane, closer in profile to a massive tiger than to the lion on a coat of arms. There's also an ongoing debate buried in the evidence about how cave lions actually lived day to day. Modern lions are famous for living in prides, coordinated family groups with complex social structures. For a long time, it was assumed cave lions probably did the same, but the evidence is mixed. Some cave paintings, particularly certain scenes in Chauvet Cave, showing multiple lions cooperating to bring down bison, suggest group hunting behavior. Researchers have pointed out that hunting cooperatively would have made a lot of sense, given the size of the prey cave lions were after. Animals like young or elderly woolly mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, bison, horses, and reindeer. Taking down something the size of a mammoth is not a solo project. At the same time, scientists caution that this evidence is still fragmentary, and whether cave lions lived in tight prides like African lions or were more solitary like tigers remains an open question that ancient DNA and continued fossil discoveries are still trying to settle. Now here comes the part of the DNA story that almost nobody outside of specialist research circles has heard, and it might be the most remarkable twist in the entire cave lion saga. Even though cave lions and modern lions split apart nearly 2 million years ago and evolved as separate species across separate continents for almost the entirety of that time, they did not stay completely isolated from each other forever. The 2026 genome study, which compared 12 ancient cave lion genomes against 20 modern lion genomes, found clear evidence of interbreeding. Real, measurable gene flow between the two species, happening repeatedly over tens of thousands of years. Here's how researchers think it happened. During the coldest phases of the Ice Age, when massive amounts of water were locked up in glaciers and ice sheets, cave lion populations appear to have been pushed further south out of the deep Arctic and Siberian ranges into territory that was, at the time, occupied by populations of true lions living across Southwest Asia in a region that includes what is now Iran. These cold snaps repeatedly forced the two separate lion lineages into the same physical space, and when they met, at least occasionally they interbred. One cave lion specimen from Central East Asia, dated to roughly 20,000 years ago, was found to carry between 3.2 and 4.4% modern lion ancestry in its genome, most likely traced back to the now vanished Southwest Asian lion population. Researchers also found that the more intense the glacial period, the more interbreeding shows up in the genetic record, meaning climate change itself was directly shaping which species were exchanging genes with which across enormous stretches of time. But the truly haunting part of this discovery is what happened on the other side of that exchange, because gene flow works in both directions. If cave lion DNA ended up in modern lion populations too, that means there were, at some point, wild modern lions walking around Southwest Asia carrying inherited fragments of an entirely separate, deeply diverged species buried inside their own genome. A living, breathing, genetic echo of an animal that would eventually go extinct. And according to researchers, the population of lions carrying the highest known percentage of that cave lion ancestry was a group of lions living in Southwest Asia, the same regional lion population connected to the historic Persian or Asiatic lion. Those lions did not go extinct in the Ice Age. They survived for thousands of years after the cave lion itself was long gone. And then humans hunted them to extinction across most of that range, largely during the 19th and early 20th centuries, through sport hunting and habitat destruction until only a tiny relic population remained, confined today to a single forest reserve in India. Which means that somewhere in that collapse, the very last living genetic thread connecting our world to the vanished cave lion may have been quietly erased as well. Not by an ice age, not by climate change, but by modern rifles only a little over a century ago. One researcher on the study described this discovery in almost poetic terms, saying that interbreeding is not just a curiosity, that it shows how climate-driven changes actively shaped the evolutionary paths of entire species, and that when separated populations come back into contact, they leave behind a genetic record that survives even after one of them disappears completely. So how did the cave lion itself actually go extinct? This is where, honestly, science still doesn't have a fully settled answer, and researchers are refreshingly upfront about that uncertainty. What we do know is the timing. Cave lions vanished from the fossil record around 13 to 14,000 years ago, right at the tail end of the last ice age, which places their disappearance inside the same broad wave of destruction that wiped out woolly mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, giant cave bears, and a huge swath of the other massive ice age mammals across the northern hemisphere. This mass die-off of giant ice age animals is often called the megafauna extinction, and cave lions were swept up in it alongside nearly everything they depended on. The leading explanation researchers point to is a kind of perfect storm rather than one single cause. The climate was warming rapidly, transforming the open steppe grasslands cave lions depended on into forests and different vegetation types that supported far less of their preferred prey. At the same time, many of their major food sources, the mammoths, the rhinos, the large herds of grazing animals, were themselves collapsing under that same climate pressure, sometimes combined with human hunting pressure. And human populations across Eurasia were expanding and becoming more effective hunters right during this same window, which means cave lions were likely dealing with shrinking habitat, a shrinking food supply, and a growing human population competing for the exact same prey, possibly even hunting the lions themselves, all hitting at once. One researcher involved in the recent genomic work summed it up plainly, saying that cave lions were under a huge amount of pressure from rapid climate change combined with rising human population density, and that while their extinction fits the broader pattern seen across Ice Age megafauna, the precise reasons still are not completely understood. What the DNA has done is strip away the lazy version of this story, the version where the cave lion is just a bigger, furrier lion that happened to live in the Ice Age. In its place is something far more remarkable, an animal that broke off from the modern lion's family tree nearly 2 million years ago and then built an entirely separate evolutionary legacy, ranging across 3 continents, adapting a snow-ready coat and a mysteriously maneless profile, possibly hunting in coordinated groups against prey the size of mammoths, surviving through repeated ice ages, and even during brief windows when climate forced 2 separated species back into the same territory, leaving behind fragments of its own genome hidden inside the DNA of true lions. That hidden genetic thread very likely survived far longer than the cave lion itself did, quietly passed down through generations of Southwest Asian lions, all the way up until human hunting pushed those very lions to the edge of extinction as well, less than 150 years ago, which means the closest living echo of the cave lion may have vanished from the wild, not during some ancient climate catastrophe, but within the lifetime of our own great-grandparents, and there is still more waiting to be uncovered. Only 12 full cave lion genomes have been sequenced so far, out of a species that once ranged across an enormous stretch of the planet for nearly 2 million years. Every new specimen pulled from Siberian permafrost, every new frozen cub like Boris or Sparta, carries the potential to rewrite pieces of this story yet again. The cave lion was never just an ancient lion, it was its own entire chapter of Ice Age history, one we are only now, through the DNA locked inside frozen bone and preserved fur, finally starting to read.